mist-shrouded lands between, where ancient sorrows echo through crumbling stone and the weight of forgotten kingdoms presses down like a winter fog, few names carry the resonance of Godwyn the Golden. Here was a prince who should have been the salvation of his realm, a golden-haired heir who befriended dragons and commanded the very lightning itself. Yet his story is not one of triumph, but of tragedy so profound that it shattered the foundations of reality and plunged an entire world into chaos. Tonight, we venture into the deepest mysteries of Elden Ring's lore to uncover the truth about a demigod whose death changed everything, whose corrupted form now spreads beneath the roots of the great tree like a cancer of undeath, and whose legacy haunts every corner of the lands between. This is the story of Godwyn the Golden, the Prince of Gold who became the Prince of Death, the Golden Prince. To understand the magnitude of Godwyn's fall, we must first appreciate the heights from which he tumbled. Born during the age of the Erd Tree to Queen Marika the Eternal and her first consort, Godfrey the First Elden Lord, Godwyn entered the world as the crown jewel of the Golden lineage. Unlike his twin brothers, Morgott and Mohg, who were cursed to be born as omens with gnarled horns sprouting from their flesh, Godwyn emerged into the world unmarked by any curse or corruption. This fact cannot be understated in its significance. In a family where divine blood carried with it the burden of cosmic afflictions, where millennia would be consumed by scarlet rot, where Miquella would be trapped in eternal youth, where the Omen twins would be shunned and imprisoned, Godwyn alone was born pure. His golden hair caught the light like spun sunbeams. His bearing was noble and commanding, and his very presence seemed to embody the ideals of the Golden Order itself. He was called Godwyn the Golden, and he became known as the Prince of Gold, a scion of the so-called Golden Line, of which Godric the Grafted was the final descendant. But Godwyn's significance extended far beyond mere bloodline. He represented hope itself, the promise that the divine union between God and man could produce something truly sublime. The young prince grew up in the royal capital of Leyndell during the golden age of the Erd Tree, when Queen Marika's empire stretched across the known world and the light of the great tree illuminated every corner of the realm. These were days of unprecedented prosperity and expansion, when the Golden Order seemed unshakable and eternal. Yet even in this age of glory, darkness gathered on the horizon, and it would be Godwyn himself who would first confront the ancient forces that predated Marika's reign. The War of the Ancient Dragons. The first great test of Godwyn's character came not through court intrigue or political maneuvering, but through fire and lightning. Early in his mother's divine reign, the Erd Tree came under assault by the Ancient Dragons, who had ruled the world before Marika's ascent. This was no mere territorial dispute between competing powers. It was a clash between the old ways and the new, between the primordial forces that had shaped the world and the divine authority that sought to remake it. When the ancient dragon Fortissax breached the walls of Leyndell, triggering the War of the Ancient Dragons, it marked the only time in recorded history that Leyndell's walls had fallen. The sight must have been apocalyptic. A colossal dragon, its body composed of gravel stone imbued with primordial gold, crashing through the supposedly impregnable defences of the royal capital. The massive form of Fortissax, frozen in time as it pierced the city's walls, still serves as a monument to that terrible day when the dragons reminded the Golden Order that older powers still remembered their ancient claims to dominion. In this hour of crisis, when the very foundations of Marika's empire trembled beneath the assault of beings that had ruled when the world was young, Godwyn stepped forward. He was not yet the seasoned warrior he would become, but in him burned the divine fire of his lineage and the unshakable conviction that the Golden Order represented mankind's destiny. the young prince took to the field not merely as a demigod fulfilling his duty, but as a champion of everything the Erd Tree represented. The war's climax came when Godwyn the Golden faced Fortissax, known as the mightiest boulder stone, and renowned for its use of twin red lightning stakes. This was not simply a battle between two powerful beings, it was a confrontation between different epochs of the world's history. Fortissax embodied the primordial power of the ancient dragons, creatures whose bodies were carved from living stone and whose breath was the very lightning that split the sky. Against this avatar of the old world stood Godwyn, young and untested, carrying only his courage and the hopes of a civilization that had dared to dream of surpassing the achievements of those who came before. The friendship that changed everything. What happened next would resonate through the ages, becoming the stuff of legend and fundamentally altering the course of history. Godwyn defeated Fortissax, but he befriended his fallen foe, and their bond gave rise to the ancient dragon cult of the royal capital. This moment, a young prince choosing mercy over conquest, friendship over dominion, represented something unprecedented in the often brutal calculus of divine politics. The decision to spare Fortissax was not born of weakness or naivety. Godwyn had proven his strength in battle, demonstrating that he possessed the power to destroy one of the mightiest beings in existence. His choice to extend friendship to his defeated enemy instead revealed a wisdom and magnanimity that marked him as truly exceptional among the demigods. Where others might have seen only a conquered foe to be humiliated or destroyed, Godwyn recognized a worthy adversary who could become an even worthier ally. The ancient dragon cult was based in Lendal, royal capital, and championed by Godwyn the Golden in collaboration with Ancient Dragon Fortissax and Dread Fortissax after the conclusion of the war between Lendal and the ancient dragons. This was revolutionary, a formal integration of the old powers into the new order, a recognition that the wisdom and strength of the ancient dragons could complement rather than threaten the Golden Order's vision for the world. The theological implications were profound. Worship of the ancient dragons did not conflict with faith in the Erd Tree, as the dragon's lightning was imbued with gold, and as such the cult was permitted within Lendal. This harmonious blending of ancient and modern, of primordial power and divine order, represented the very best of what the Golden Age could achieve. It showed that progress need not come at the expense of wisdom, that new forms of divinity could embrace rather than destroy the sacred traditions of the past. Through his friendship with Fortissax, Godwyn learned to channel Fortissax's power to summon a storm of golden lightning. This was more than simply acquiring a new weapon or magical ability. It represented a fundamental evolution in Godwyn's nature. The lightning he commanded was not merely destructive force, but a synthesis of the old and new ancient power refined through divine purpose. When Godwyn called down his golden lightning, he was not just wielding the fury of the storm, but manifesting the very principle that the Golden Order hoped to embody. The transformation of raw power into enlightened purpose. His inner circle of elite ancient dragon knights formed his personal guard, who received the largest amber medallions ever bestowed. These were not mere ceremonial positions, but bonds forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the unprecedented alliance between dragon and demigod. The amber medallions they carried were symbols of a new age, tokens of a time when ancient enemies could become trusted allies, when the divisions that had defined the world's history could be transcended through courage and wisdom. The prince at the height of his glory. In the years following the Dragon War, Godwyn reached the pinnacle of his influence and power. He had proven himself as a warrior, demonstrated wisdom beyond his years as a diplomat, and shown the kind of visionary leadership that could reshape the world itself. The ancient dragon cult flourished under his patronage, becoming not just a religious movement, but a bridge between different eras of the world's history. The prince who had befriended dragons commanded respect from the highest to the lowest ranks of society. Godwyn was protected by a personal entourage in addition to the royal palace guard. These were not merely soldiers assigned to protect a valuable political asset, but devoted followers who had witnessed firsthand the transformative power of his leadership. They had seen him face down ancient dragons in battle and emerge victorious, watched him extend mercy to defeated enemies, and forge lasting alliances from the ashes of war. Yet for all his achievements, Godwyn remained remarkably humble. Unlike some of his half-siblings who would later retreat into isolated pursuits of personal power, Godwyn understood that his gifts were meant to serve something greater than himself. He was the heir apparent not just to a throne, but to a vision of what the world could become under enlightened rule. Every action he took, every alliance he forged, every enemy he chose to spare rather than destroy, was guided by this larger purpose. The medallions of the largest variety were conferred to Godwyn's inner circle of distinguished golden knights. These amber medallions, treasured as the most precious of jewels in the age of Godfrey, represented more than wealth or status. They were tangible symbols of participation in something unprecedented, the creation of a new form of governance that could unite ancient powers with modern wisdom, that could honor the past while building toward a more enlightened future. During this golden period, Godwyn's influence extended far beyond military conquest or political maneuvering. He became a cultural icon, a living embodiment of the Golden Order's highest ideals. His very presence at court functions or public ceremonies drew crowds who came not merely to see a prince, but to witness someone who seemed to have achieved a perfect harmony between power and wisdom, strength and mercy. The prince's relationship with his family during this period appears to have been remarkably warm, especially considering the often fraught dynamics that plagued other demigod siblings. There is a statue in the Haligtree of an adult figure, hugging the twin Empyreans, Malenia and Miquella. This is most likely Godwyn, as the crown is too dissimilar to Marika's. This touching image suggests that despite the vast differences in their circumstances, Godwyn basking in public acclaim while his younger half-siblings struggled with their respective curses, he maintained genuine affection for his family. The relationship between Godwyn and Miquella appears to have been particularly close. Evidence suggests that Miquella harbored deep love and respect for his older brother, feelings that would later manifest in desperate attempts to grant Godwyn a true death after his assassination. This plaintive cry reveals the depth of anguish that Godwyn's fate would cause those who loved him. The gathering storm. Yet even as Godwyn stood at the height of his power and influence, forces were gathering that would bring his golden age to a sudden and tragic end. The very success of the Golden Order, the unprecedented stability and prosperity it had brought to the lands between, had created new tensions and resentments among those who felt marginalized by Marika's reign. Chief among these dissatisfied figures was Ranni the Witch, Lunar Princess and daughter of Queen Rennala and Radagon. Ranni, who sought to change her fate of being a pawn to the Two Fingers, stole a piece of the Rune of Death from Malekith, who served as the guardian of the rune. Here was someone who looked upon the Golden Order's promise of eternal life and saw not paradise, but prison. Where others saw the blessing of immortality, Ranni perceived the curse of endless servitude to cosmic forces beyond human understanding. The philosophical divide could not have been greater. Godwyn represented everything positive about the Golden Order: its capacity for growth, its ability to integrate former enemies, its promise of enlightened rule. He was living proof that the system could work, that divine authority could be exercised with wisdom and restraint. But to Ranni, these very achievements were evidence of a more fundamental problem: the reduction of thinking beings to instruments of alien will. Ranni was looking for a way to free herself from the control of the Two Fingers. The Two Fingers, those grotesque appendages, that served as conduits for the greater will's commands, represented everything she despised about the current order. They reduced complex moral and political questions to simple matters of obedience, transforming potential gods into mere executors of incomprehensible cosmic purpose. As an Empyrean, one of the rare individuals capable of succeeding Marika as a vessel for the greater will, Ranni faced a particularly acute version of this dilemma. She possessed the power to reshape the world, but only if she accepted a role that would strip her of agency and autonomy. The path to godhood offered by the Two Fingers was not ascension, but surrender. Not empowerment, but enslavement to forces that cared nothing for human desires or dreams. Ranni's solution was characteristically radical. If she could not escape her fate through conventional means, she would cheat death itself. Wishing to shed her Empyrean body but preserve her spirit, she knew that the spirit of someone else had to die as well. This was the cruel mathematics of the ritual she contemplated. To achieve spiritual freedom, she would need to sacrifice someone else's soul. The choice of Godwyn as this sacrificial victim was not arbitrary. Whether or not Ranni knew that Godwyn the Golden would be targeted is unclear. But from a strategic perspective, he represented the perfect target. His death would accomplish multiple objectives. It would provide the spiritual sacrifice needed for Ranni's transformation, strike a devastating blow against Marika's stability, and eliminate the most capable potential successor to the current order. Godwyn's very virtues made him dangerous to those who sought radical change. His success in integrating the dragons, his popularity among the people, his apparent immunity to the curses that plagued other demigods, all of these factors marked him as someone who could potentially lead a reformed but still fundamentally unchanged Golden Order into the future. For revolutionaries like Ranni, who sought not reform but replacement, such a figure posed an existential threat to their ambitions. The Night of Black Knives. The Night of Black Knives was an event that would serve as the catalyst of the conflict known as the Shattering. On this night, everything that had been built over centuries of careful statecraft and divine authority would come crashing down in a cascade of blood, betrayal, and cosmic horror. The conspiracy that destroyed Godwyn was elaborate and far-reaching. With the stolen fragment, Ranni proceeded to imbue the Black Knives of Numen assassins, all of them being women from the Eternal Cities with ties to Marika, with the powers of destined death. These were not ordinary weapons, but instruments of absolute termination, blades that could kill even those protected by divine immortality. The choice of assassins was itself significant. The assassins that carried out the deeds of the Night of the Black Knives were all women and rumoured to be new men who had close ties with Marika herself. This created a web of implication and suspicion that would poison relationships throughout the royal family for generations to come. Were these women acting independently, following Ranni's commands, or pursuing an agenda connected to Marika herself? The question would never be definitively answered, adding layers of paranoia and mistrust to an already tragic situation. The weapons themselves were technological marvels of dark purpose. A ritual performed on the oddly misshapen blade imbued it with the power of the stolen rune of death. To understand the significance of this, one must appreciate that the rune of death represented the fundamental force of termination that Marika had sealed away when establishing the Golden Order. By freeing this power and incorporating it into physical weapons, Ranni had essentially created instruments of absolute ending, blades that could cut through immortality itself. On the night of the plot, the assassins arrived in Lendil, the royal capital, and slew Godwyn the Golden, carving the curse mark of death into his flesh. The image of these silent figures moving through the supposedly secure halls of the royal capital, bearing weapons that could kill gods, represents one of the most haunting moments in the entire history of the Lands Between. Godwyn's death was not a clean or simple termination. The curse mark was supposed to form a complete circle, but as both Ranni and Godwyn had unexpectedly died at the same time, it was split into two half-wheels. This division would have consequences that neither conspirator anticipated, creating a form of fractured death that left both victims trapped in states that were neither fully alive nor completely dead. Godwyn's soul alone perished, while Ranni became the first demigod to die in the flesh. The asymmetry of this double death created something unprecedented and horrifying. A being whose body lived on without the animating spirit that had made it human, and another whose spirit endured without the physical form that had housed it. For Godwyn, this meant something far worse than simple death. His body, denied the release of true termination, began to undergo transformations that violated every natural law. In the absence of a soul, his body has transformed into the Prince of Death. What had once been the Golden Prince, exemplar of everything noble and beautiful about the divine order, became a grotesque parody of life, a thing that existed in direct contradiction to everything he had once represented. The Prince of Death, the transformation of Godwyn's corpse into the Prince of Death represents one of the most disturbing elements of Elden Ring's cosmic horror. The golden-haired Prince of Death has grown to immense size, developing a scaly fishtail and webbed forearms reminiscent of basilisks. Deathblight erupts from his body, drawing swarms of buzzing flies. His face has warped into a grotesque fungal-like disc, and his eyes are drained of color. This is not mere physical corruption, but a fundamental violation of the natural order. Godwyn's body, deprived of the soul that should have guided its development, began to grow according to alien patterns. The princely form that had once commanded dragons and inspired devotion became something that hurt to look upon, a mass of flesh and scale that bore only the faintest resemblance to its original configuration. His Erd-tree burial contaminated the great tree roots with Deathroot, giving rise to those who live in death. Even in death, or rather, in his state of undeath, Godwyn continued to influence the world around him. But where his living presence had brought harmony and growth, his corrupted form spread a cancer of unnatural existence that infected the very foundations of the world. The irony is profound and tragic. Godwyn, who had spent his life building bridges between ancient powers and new order, became in death a source of chaos that threatened to unravel everything he had worked to achieve. The roots that carried his corruption were the same root system that had once nourished the Erd-tree, the great symbol of Marika's divine authority. Through Godwyn's contamination, death itself began to spread through the circulatory system of the world. These undead worshipped Godwyn as the Prince of Death, believing he would eventually return and lead them. Here we see another layer of tragedy, that even in his corrupted state, Godwyn inspired devotion. Those who live in death, the undead creatures spawned by his influence, look to him not as a source of their curse, but as their potential salvation. They saw in the Prince of Death a leader who understood their condition, who had been the first to experience the liminal state between life and death that now defined their existence. Yet this worship was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The consciousness that had made Godwyn a leader worth following was gone, destroyed in the assassination that had claimed his soul. What remained was a body guided by alien impulses, a thing that responded to instincts and drives that had no connection to the wisdom and compassion that had defined the living prince. Godwyn's cadaver surrogates are found at Fog Rift Catacombs, Scorpion River Catacombs, and Stormvale Castle. The presence of these smaller manifestations throughout the lands between demonstrates the scope of his posthumous influence. Like a cancer that spreads by establishing new tumors throughout the body, Godwyn's death-touched essence created nodes of corruption that extended his presence far beyond his primary corpse. The discovery of one such manifestation beneath Stormvale Castle would prove particularly significant to those seeking to understand the Knight of Black Knives. An aspect of Godwyn's corpse appeared in the depths of Stormvale Castle and is responsible for the loss of Rogia's legs. This encounter between a living sorcerer and the dead prince would ultimately provide crucial evidence about the conspiracy that had destroyed the Golden Order's greatest champion. Fortissax's loyalty. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Godwyn's posthumous existence is the story of Ancient Dragon Fortissax, the mighty being who had once been his enemy and had become his closest friend. After Godwyn the Golden became the Prince of Death, the Ancient Dragon fought long and hard against the death within its companion. This represents loyalty of an almost incomprehensible depth. Fortissax, one of the mightiest beings in existence, chose to follow his friend into the realm of death itself, seeking to save Godwyn from the corruption that was consuming him. The dragon entered not just physical danger, but spiritual jeopardy, exposing itself to the same death-touched contamination that had already claimed Godwyn's soul. Fortissax entered Godwyn's mind in an attempt to keep the death blight from completely consuming his friend. This was not a battle that could be won through physical strength or magical power, but a struggle against the fundamental forces of corruption and decay. For who knows how long, Fortissax maintained this vigil, fighting a war within the landscape of Godwyn's dying consciousness. Alas, victory was never achieved, and its only reward was corruption. The dragon's noble effort to save his friend ultimately resulted in his own transformation into the Lich Dragon Fortissax, a being consumed by the same death blight that had claimed Godwyn. A lot of his scales have been torn off, and you can physically see the death blight infecting Fortissax's wounds. Hell, his whole body has been rotten black from the death blight consuming him. When players eventually encounter Lich Dragon Fortissax in the depths of Godwyn's deathbed dream, they are facing not a magnificent ancient dragon at the height of its power, but a loyal friend who has sacrificed everything in a futile attempt to save someone he loved. You're just there to finish the job. It may be disappointing for the gameplay aspect, but if you want to consult the lore, Fortissax entered Godwyn's mind in an attempt to keep the death blight from completely consuming his friend. For who knows how long Fortissax has been at war with the death blight within Godwyn, but it's been chipping away at Fortissax all this time. The battle against Lich Dragon Fortissax is thus not a conquest but a mercy killing. Not a victory over an enemy, but the final act in a tragedy that began with the friendship between a prince and a dragon. When players strike the killing blow, they are ending not just Fortissax's suffering, but concluding a chapter of loyalty and devotion that spans from the heights of the Golden Age to the depths of death itself. The Shattering Godwyn's death would precipitate the Shattering, a war between the demigods which would be responsible for much of the current state of the lands between. The assassination of the Golden Prince was not merely the elimination of a single individual, but the destruction of the keystone that held the entire structure of the Golden Order together. Queen Marika's response to her son's death was immediate and catastrophic. Marika was so stricken with grief that she destroyed the Elden Ring. Or maybe that was the plan all along. The shattering of the Elden Ring represented not just a political crisis, but a metaphysical catastrophe that unraveled the fundamental laws governing reality in the lands between. To understand the magnitude of this act, one must appreciate that the Elden Ring was not merely a symbol of political authority, but the cosmic framework that held existence itself together. By destroying it, Marika essentially broke the world, creating a situation where the basic rules of life, death, space, and time became negotiable rather than absolute. The conflict broke a vast and prosperous empire into brittle fragments. No single side could find enough purchase to maintain a decisive victory, even when fueled by the power of a great rune. The fragments of the shattered Elden Ring became great runes, each one containing enough power to transform its bearer into a demigod-level entity. But rather than providing the tools for reconstruction, these fragments became prizes in an endless war of succession. The demigods who had once been siblings in Marika's extended family became rivals in a conflict that would consume generations. The Battle of General Radan against Malenia the Severed illustrated that neither strength nor skill alone would be enough to take control of the entirety of the lands Marika had united. Even the mightiest of the demigods found that their enhanced power was insufficient to overcome the fundamental instability that the Shattering had introduced into the world. In this context, Godwyn's absence became even more tragically significant. He had been the one demigod who possessed not just power, but the wisdom and diplomacy necessary to unite former enemies. His success in ending the Dragon War through alliance rather than conquest had demonstrated his unique ability to find solutions that transformed conflict into cooperation. With Godwyn gone, the remaining demigods lacked anyone with both the authority and the vision necessary to end their fratricidal war. Those who live in death. One of the most profound consequences of Godwyn's assassination was the emergence of a new category of existence: those who live in death. This is the umbrella term for most of the skeletons and other undead that you find along your journey. These beings represent something entirely new in the cosmic order. Entities that exist in direct violation of the binary between life and death that the Golden Order had sought to maintain. The Golden Order aligns itself against those who live in death, seeing them as a mockery of the way of things. From the perspective of the established order, these creatures were abominations that violated the fundamental principles upon which reality was supposed to operate. They were neither alive nor dead, but trapped in a liminal state that challenged every assumption about the nature of existence. Yet from another perspective, those who live in death represented something potentially liberating. While immortality was given to all the people in the world, it would make sense the demigods were also protected. To many, this seemed to take away the meaning of life, and they wanted the world to be free of the outer god's control. The undead creatures spawned by Godwyn's corruption offered a third option between the sterile immortality of the Golden Order and the absolute termination of true death. These undead worshipped Godwyn as the Prince of Death, believing he would eventually return and lead them. In their eyes, Godwyn had become something greater than he had been in life. Not just a prince of a particular kingdom, but a lord of all those who existed outside the conventional boundaries of existence. They saw in his corrupted form not a monster, but a pioneer, someone who had blazed a trail into new forms of being. The theological implications were staggering. If those who live in death could maintain consciousness and agency despite their state, what did that say about the nature of the soul? If they could form communities and worship their patron, were they perhaps more alive than the supposedly living beings trapped in the Golden Order's sterile immortality? These questions had no easy answers, but they challenged every assumption about what it meant to exist in the lands between. Fear and the Age of Duskborn. The story of Godwyn's posthumous influence reaches its climax through the actions of Fear, the deathbed companion. Fear, deathbed companion, was the guardian of those who live in death. She represented not just someone who ministered to the undead, but a religious leader who sought to transform their marginalized existence into a new form of cosmic order. Having received the other half of the curse mark from Ranni's discarded body with help of the Tarnished, Fear lay with Godwyn to grant him a second life as the Prince of Death. This act was simultaneously intimate and cosmic, personal and political. By uniting the two halves of the curse mark of death, Fear sought to restore a form of wholeness to Godwyn's fractured existence. As a result of their union, Fear conceived a rune which a Tarnished seeking to become Elden Lord might use to mend the Elden Ring, re-imbuing the principle of death within the Golden Order. The mending rune of the Death Prince represented a radical reimagining of what the restored world could become. Rather than returning to the sterile immortality of the old Golden Order, this rune would create an age where death and life existed in harmony. Formed of the two Hallowbrand half-wheels combined, it will embed the principle of life within death into order. The Golden Order was created by confining destined death. Thus, this new order will be one of death restored. This represented perhaps the most fitting tribute to Godwyn's legacy, not the restoration of his personal life, but the transformation of his death into the foundation for a more complete and honest form of existence. The Age of Duskborn, as this potential new order came to be known, would be Godwyn's final gift to the world. Through his death, he had inadvertently created the conditions for a form of existence that transcended the limitations that had defined both life and death under the previous order. In this age, those who had been marginalized and excluded would find their place, and the natural cycles of existence would be restored to their proper balance. The family's grief. The impact of Godwyn's death extended far beyond political and cosmic consequences. It shattered the hearts of those who had loved him. The evidence suggests that Godwyn had maintained warm relationships with his family members, despite the vast differences in their circumstances and the complex dynamics that plagued the extended royal family. Perhaps no one felt Godwyn's loss more acutely than Miquella the Kind. The relationship between these two half-brothers appears to have transcended the typical political calculations that governed most interactions between demigods. Where others saw potential rivals or useful allies, Miquella and Godwyn seem to have found genuine fraternal affection. The depth of Miquella's grief is captured in the inscription on the golden epitaph, a sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die. These words, so simple yet so laden with anguish, reveal the particular cruelty of Godwyn's fate. It was not enough that he had been murdered. His very death had been incomplete, trapping him in a state that denied him even the dignity of proper rest. Many figures, including his half-brother Miquella and his companion Fortissax, tried to cure him of his condition and allow him a proper death, but to no avail. The attempts to grant Godwyn true death were not merely acts of mercy, but desperate efforts to restore some measure of justice to a situation that violated every natural law. For Miquella, who had spent his cursed existence seeking ways to cure afflictions and restore wholeness to broken things, his brother's condition must have represented the ultimate frustration, a problem that all his wisdom and power could not solve. The statue in the haligtree of an adult figure hugging the twin Empyreans Malenia and Miquella provides another glimpse into the warmth that had existed within this fractured family. The figure's crown is too dissimilar to Marika's, suggesting this is most likely Godwyn. The image of the Golden Prince embracing his younger half-siblings speaks to a gentleness and affection that transcended the political complexities of their situation. This tenderness becomes even more poignant when we consider the curses that afflicted Miquella and Malenia. Godwyn, alone among his generation, had been born without any divine curse or corruption. He could have looked down upon his afflicted siblings with pity or disdain, could have used his perfect nature as evidence of his superior worthiness. Instead, the statue suggests he chose to offer comfort and protection, to use his advantages in service of those who had been less fortunate. Even his brothers Morgott and Mohg, the accursed omen twins who had been imprisoned beneath Leyndell since birth, appear to have maintained some connection to their golden brother. The name of Mohg's dynasty, Mohgwyn, seems to be a combination of his own name and Godwyn's. This suggests that despite being separated by the vast gulf between acceptable and unacceptable royal offspring, Mohg retained enough love and respect for Godwyn to honor him in the very name of his rebellion against the Golden Order. The tragedy of these relationships is that they reveal what the Golden Order might have been at its best. In Godwyn's treatment of his family, we see the possibility of a form of divine rule based on compassion rather than exclusion, on embrace rather than exile. His death removed not just a political figure, but the living embodiment of the Golden Order's highest aspirations. The Golden Order's greatest loss. To understand the true magnitude of what was lost with Godwyn's death, we must consider what he represented for the future of the Golden Order. Here was not just another demigod seeking power for its own sake, but someone who had demonstrated the ability to transform ancient conflicts into lasting alliances, to extend mercy without weakness, and to lead with both strength and wisdom. Godwyn's success in ending the Dragon War had established a template for how the Golden Order could interact with forces that predated Marika's reign. Rather than seeking to destroy or subjugate these ancient powers, he had shown that they could be integrated into a larger vision of cosmic harmony. The ancient dragon cult that emerged from his friendship with Fortissax proved that the new order need not come at the expense of the old wisdom. This approach stood in stark contrast to the methods typically employed by the Golden Order in its expansion. The conquest of the fire giants, the subjugation of various other peoples, the systematic exclusion of those deemed impure. These campaigns had built an empire through force and fear. Godwyn's diplomatic triumph suggested an alternative path, one where growth came through alliance rather than conquest. Had Godwyn lived to inherit the throne, the lands between might have seen a very different form of divine rule. His proven ability to work with former enemies, his apparent immunity to the curses that plagued other demigods, and his genuine affection for his family members suggested someone who could have ruled with both authority and compassion. The loss of this potential future was perhaps as tragic as the loss of Godwyn himself. The shattering that followed his death created a situation where the worst aspects of divine ambition ran unchecked, where siblings became enemies and the land became a battlefield. Without Godwyn's moderating influence and unifying presence, the remaining demigods had no model for how power could be exercised responsibly. Even more tragically, Godwyn's death had been orchestrated by someone who claimed to oppose the tyrannical aspects of the Golden Order. Ranni's rebellion was motivated by legitimate grievances about autonomy and freedom, but her methods ensured that the most enlightened potential leader of that order would never have the chance to reform it from within. In destroying Godwyn, she eliminated not just an obstacle to change, but perhaps the best hope for positive change. The corruption spreads. While Godwyn's immediate death was tragic enough, the ongoing consequences of his corrupted state created suffering that extended far beyond the royal family. The soulless body of Godwyn the Golden was buried below Lendil at the base of the Erdtree's roots, located in the Deathroot depths. This placement, intended to honor the fallen prince with the most sacred form of burial available, instead became the vector through which death itself infiltrated the cosmic order. Godwyn's spirit could not return to the Erdtree because he did not experience a true death. The incomplete nature of his assassination had created a theological crisis that the Golden Order was unprepared to handle. All their rituals and ceremonies assumed the fundamental distinction between life and death, but Godwyn's condition defied these categories entirely. Through Godwyn, the rune of death seeped into the great tree roots and spread throughout the lands between. Like a poison introduced into the circulatory system, the corruption carried by Godwyn's incomplete death began to manifest everywhere the roots touched. Soon after, the Death Prince's distorted visage manifested itself across the realm. His eyes peered out of tendrils and vines, and even his distorted face materialized in places of Erdtree burial. This phenomenon created a profound sense of unease throughout the lands between. Imagine walking through a peaceful grove or visiting a sacred burial site, only to find the grotesquely transformed face of the former Golden Prince staring back at you from the bark of trees or the surface of sacred stones. These manifestations served as constant reminders that death itself had been corrupted, that even the most sacred spaces were no longer safe from contamination. The corruption sprouted Deathroot, giving rise to those who live in death. These growths appeared like dark cancers on the body of the world, twisted vegetative forms that pulsed with unnatural life. The Deathroot served both as a symptom of the world's sickness and as a source of further contamination, creating new undead wherever it took hold. Later, the roots of the Erd tree were disconnected from those below. This desperate measure, taken by authorities seeking to contain the spread of death-touch corruption, represented a fundamental amputation of the world's spiritual circulatory system. By severing these connections, they saved the upper regions from further contamination, but at the cost of isolating vast underground areas in a state of perpetual death in life. The irony of this situation was profound. Godwyn, who had spent his life building connections between different parts of the world, between ancient and modern, between enemy and ally, between dragon and human, became in death a source of separation and isolation. The very root system that should have connected all life to the sacred tree instead became a network for spreading the antithesis of life itself. The prince's twisted transformation. Perhaps no aspect of Godwyn's story is more horrifying than what he became after death. The transformation of the Golden Prince into the Prince of Death represents one of the most disturbing examples of cosmic horror in the entire Elden Ring mythos. This was not simply physical decay, but a fundamental violation of everything that had made Godwyn who he was. Godwyn's main body rests at the Prince of Death's throne, located in a shallow pool of purple water at the base of a tainted root in the deep-root depths. The setting itself tells a story. What should have been a place of honor and rest has become a grotesque parody of a royal court. The throne is not a seat of power, but a prison. The purple water, not a ceremonial pool, but a stagnant pond of corruption. The body itself has grown to immense size, developing a scaly fishtail and webbed forearms reminiscent of basilisks. This aquatic transformation seems particularly cruel, as it divorces Godwyn's remains from everything human or noble about his original form. Where once he had walked upright as a prince among men, his corpse now wallows in corruption like some deep-sea abomination. Death blight erupts from his body, drawing swarms of buzzing flies. These insects serve as both symptom and vector of the corruption that radiates from Godwyn's form. They carry the essence of his undeath to new locations, ensuring that his influence continues to spread even as his body remains trapped in its underwater throne room. Most disturbing of all, his face has warped into a grotesque, fungal-like disc, and his eyes are drained of color. The features that had once inspired devotion and respect have been transformed into something that hurts to look upon. The eyes that had once gazed with wisdom and compassion now stare blindly from a face that has lost all resemblance to anything human. Yet even in this corrupted state, Godwyn continues to inspire a form of worship. Although the Prince of Death is the source of the death blight, the Prince of Death's throne is harmless to the player. This suggests that despite his monstrous transformation, some vestige of Godwyn's protective nature remains. Even as a corrupted prince of the undead, he offers sanctuary to those who approach him without hostile intent. Like his mother Marika, Godwyn is strung up and called a martyr. This parallel between mother and son adds another layer of tragedy to the story. Both figures, who should have been sources of strength and guidance for their people, ended up as prisoners of forces beyond their control, suspended in states that denied them both life and death. Godwyn's cadaver surrogates are thought to be his larger manifestations found at Fog Rift catacombs, Scorpion River Catacombs, and Stormvale Castle. These smaller versions of his corrupted form serve as nodes in a network of death that spans the continent. Each surrogate represents another location where the Prince of Death's influence has taken root, another place where the natural order has been violated by his incomplete termination. The Dragon Knight's Dilemma. One of the most poignant aspects of Godwyn's posthumous existence involves the fate of those who had served him most faithfully. Godwyn was protected by a personal entourage in addition to the royal palace guard. These elite warriors had not merely sworn allegiance to a political position, but had bound themselves to Godwyn personally, drawn by his character and achievements rather than simply his royal status. After his death, Godwyn's closest allies did not agree on which Godwyn to aid. The Golden Knights served the Prince of Death, but Fortissax fought to stop it. This division reveals the impossible choice that faced those who had loved the living prince. Should they honor the memory of what he had been, or serve what he had become? Some of Godwyn's followers chose to embrace his transformation, becoming Death Knights who served the Prince of Death. These warriors underwent their own corruption, accepting the touch of Deathblight in order to remain close to their transformed lord. A long-hafted golden axe, wielded by the Death Knight, bears a representation of a decayed golden ring and crackles with lightning, the power of the capital's ancient dragon cult. The Knight, once the personal guard of Godwyn, was also the protector of the Prince of Death's cadaver surrogate. These Death Knights represent a form of loyalty so profound that it transcends the boundary between life and death. They chose to follow their lord into corruption rather than abandon him to face his cursed existence alone. Their weapons still crackle with the golden lightning that Godwyn had learned from Fortissax, suggesting that even in death, some connection to his nobler aspects remained. Yet this choice came at a terrible cost. The Death Knights retained their devotion, but lost much of their humanity in the process. They became guardians of corruption rather than champions of justice, protectors of undeath rather than defenders of life. Their service to the Prince of Death, while admirable in its loyalty, ultimately served to spread the very corruption that violated everything Godwyn had stood for in life. The tragedy of their situation is that there was no correct choice available to them. To abandon Godwyn would have meant betraying their deepest loyalties and leaving their lord to face his curse alone. But to follow him into corruption meant becoming part of the problem that plagued the world, contributing to the spread of Deathblight that violated the natural order. Fortissax's choice to fight against the corruption, rather than embrace it, represents the other path that Godwyn's followers could take. The Ancient Dragon's attempt to purge the death from within his friend was ultimately futile, but it maintained the integrity of opposition to corruption rather than acceptance of it. Yet, this path too led to tragedy, as Fortissax was eventually consumed by the very force he sought to combat. The investigation. The true scope of what had happened on the Night of Black Knives might have remained hidden forever, if not for the determined investigation of sorcerer Rogier. This scholar's pursuit of truth about the conspiracy that had destroyed the Golden Order would ultimately cost him his life, but not before he uncovered crucial evidence about the forces behind Godwyn's assassination. Rogier's investigation began with his discovery of the misshapen corpse under Stormvale. The misshapen corpse under Stormvale? That is a sacred relic of the Black Knives plot, as that famed night of assassination is known. It happened during the golden age of the Erd Tree, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, the Black Blade. This discovery marked the beginning of Rogier's descent into dangerous knowledge. The encounter with Godwyn's cadaver surrogate beneath Stormvale cost him the use of his legs, but more importantly, it provided him with the first concrete evidence that the Night of Black Knives was part of a larger conspiracy. The presence of this corrupted remnant of the Golden Prince in Godric's stronghold suggested connections between the assassination and other major players in the Shattering. Rogier's analysis of the black knife print yielded even more disturbing revelations. Through careful study of the weapon's construction and the rituals that had empowered it, he was able to trace the conspiracy back to its source. The knives they wielded, though, were imparted with the power of the Rune of Death through sinister rite. Please, I beg of you, lend me the knife print for a time. I'd love nothing more than to tease out its secrets. The sorcerer's investigation revealed that the assassins who carried out the deed were scions of the Eternal City, a group entirely of women arrayed in armor of silver under cloaks which fooled the eye. This information pointed to connections between the conspiracy and the underground civilizations that had their own grievances against the Golden Order. Most significantly, Rogier's research ultimately led to the identification of Rani as the mastermind behind the assassination. Though only a fragment, a very specific ritual had to be performed to impart the power of the Rune of Death. Traces of the one who performed the rite are sure to remain in the imprint. I see. Quite the sleuth, aren't we? Indeed, I am the witch Rani. The revelation that Rani had orchestrated Godwyn's death transformed the entire understanding of the Shattering. What had appeared to be a tragic accident or the work of unknown enemies was revealed to be a calculated act of rebellion by one of Marika's own stepchildren. This knowledge cast every subsequent event in a different light, revealing the complex web of family relationships and political calculations that had led to the current crisis. Rogier's investigation came at enormous personal cost. The scholar who had sought truth about the Golden Order's greatest tragedy was himself consumed by the corruption he studied. His legs, damaged by contact with Godwyn's cadaver surrogate, never healed. Worse still, the death blight that had infected him through this contact gradually spread throughout his body, eventually claiming his life. Yet Rogier's sacrifice was not in vain. His research provided the first comprehensive understanding of how the Night of Black Knives had been orchestrated and by whom. This knowledge, passed on to the Tarnished who would ultimately determine the Lands Between's future, ensured that the truth about Godwyn's death would not remain buried forever. The Golden Epitaph, among all the monuments and memorials created to honor Godwyn's memory, none captures the tragedy of his fate quite like the Golden Epitaph. This blade, forged specifically to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, carries within its very steel the anguish of those who loved him. These words, so simple yet so devastating in their implications, reveal the particular cruelty of Godwyn's fate. Most deaths, however tragic, at least offer the dignity of finality. The deceased may be mourned, but they are granted the peace of true rest. Godwyn was denied even this basic mercy. The prayer embedded in the Golden Epitaph speaks to the fundamental violation that Godwyn's incomplete death represented. His family and friends could not even properly mourn him because he had not truly died. They could not lay him to rest because he continued to exist in a state that was neither life nor death. They could not remember him as he had been because his corrupted form continued to spread its influence throughout the world. The identity of the young boy who offered this prayer has never been definitively established, but many scholars believe it was Miquella. If so, the words take on even greater poignancy, representing not just a prayer, but a desperate plea from one brother to another. Miquella, who had spent his cursed existence seeking cures for seemingly incurable afflictions, faced in Godwyn's condition a problem that all his wisdom and power could not solve. The Golden Epitaph serves as more than just a memorial. It represents a promise. The sword's very existence declares that Godwyn's suffering will not be forgotten, that those who loved him will continue to seek justice for what was done to him. Every time the blade is drawn, Every time its golden light catches the sun, it serves as a reminder that the Golden Prince deserves better than the fate that was forced upon him. The weapon's construction from materials associated with Godwyn's life and death creates a tangible connection to both his glory and his tragedy. The gold that gives the blade its name recalls the epithets that celebrated his achievements: Godwyn the Golden, the Prince of Gold. But the blade's purpose in commemorating his death serves as a constant reminder of how those achievements were cut short. In a world where death had been outlawed and then reintroduced through violence and corruption, the golden epitaph represents a prayer for the restoration of natural order. Its inscription doesn't ask for Godwyn's return to life, but for his release into proper death. This distinction is crucial. It acknowledges that some forms of existence are worse than termination, that Godwyn's current state represents a violation so profound that oblivion would be preferable. The legacy of a shattered prince. As we reach the end of our journey through Godwyn's story, we must grapple with what his tale means for our understanding of the lands between and the cosmic forces that shape them. The tragedy of Godwyn the Golden extends far beyond the personal suffering of a single individual. It represents the shattering of hope itself, the destruction of the possibility that divine power could be exercised with wisdom and restraint. Godwyn's life had demonstrated that the tensions and conflicts that seemed to define existence in the lands between were not insurmountable. His success in ending the Dragon War through diplomacy rather than conquest, his integration of ancient powers into the new order, his evident affection for family members despite their cursed conditions, all of these achievements pointed toward the possibility of a more enlightened form of rule. His death removed not just a person, but a possibility. Without Godwyn's moderating influence and unifying vision, the remaining demigods had no model for how power could be exercised responsibly. The shattering that followed his assassination revealed the darker impulses that his presence had kept in check: the tendency toward faction and conflict, the pursuit of power for its own sake, the willingness to sacrifice others for personal advancement. Yet even in death, Godwyn continues to influence the world in ways both terrible and profound. His corruption has created new forms of existence that challenge every assumption about the nature of life and death. Those who live in death, for all their horrific aspects, represent a third option between the sterile immortality of the Golden Order and the absolute termination of true death. The age of Duskborn that Fia sought to establish through her union with the Prince of Death would be, in many ways, Godwyn's final gift to the world. Through his incomplete death, he had inadvertently created the conditions for a more honest and complete understanding of existence, one that acknowledged death as a natural part of life, rather than an enemy to be defeated. This potential new order would not restore Godwyn to his original glory, but it would transform his suffering into something meaningful. The corruption that had claimed him could become the foundation for a more balanced relationship between life and death, a cosmic order that honored both the beauty of existence and the necessity of its termination. In the end, Godwyn's story serves as both a tragedy and a hope. It is a tragedy because it shows us what was lost when wisdom and compassion were sacrificed to ambition and ideology. But it is also a hope because it demonstrates that even the worst corruptions can potentially be transformed into foundations for something better. The Golden Prince who befriended dragons and commanded lightning may be gone forever, but the Prince of Death who spreads Deathroot and commands those who live in death continues to offer possibilities for transformation and renewal. In a world that had forgotten the meaning of death, Godwyn's corrupted existence serves as a reminder that endings are not always evil, that some forms of life are purchased at too high a price, and that true wisdom requires the courage to accept both light and shadow as necessary parts of existence. The eternal question, perhaps the most haunting aspect of Godwyn's story, is the question it poses about the nature of justice in a cosmos governed by incomprehensible powers. Was his death a senseless tragedy, the destruction of innocence by forces that cared nothing for human virtue? Or was it a necessary sacrifice, the price that had to be paid for the world to evolve beyond the limitations of the Golden Order? Rani would argue that Godwyn's death, however tragic on a personal level, served a greater purpose in freeing the world from the tyranny of the greater will. From her perspective, the Golden Prince's very virtues made him dangerous. His success within the existing system made him an obstacle to the radical change she believed was necessary for genuine freedom. Yet this utilitarian calculus seems inadequate when confronted with the reality of what Godwyn represented. Here was someone who had already demonstrated the possibility of reform from within, who had shown that the Golden Order could evolve and improve rather than simply being destroyed and replaced. His assassination eliminated not just a conservative defender of the status quo, but perhaps the best hope for peaceful transformation. The corrupted state in which Godwyn now exists serves as a constant reminder of this lost possibility. Every manifestation of his death-touched influence, every appearance of his grotesquely transformed features in the bark of trees or the surface of stones, asks the same question. Was this truly necessary? Could the same goals have been achieved without destroying someone who had shown such promise for wise and compassionate leadership? These questions have no easy answers, which is perhaps the point. Godwyn's story resists simple moral categorization because it operates at the intersection of personal tragedy and cosmic necessity, individual virtue and systemic change. The Golden Prince exists now as both victim and catalyst, both cautionary tale and source of hope for transformation. In the deeper caves where his main body rests, surrounded by the purple waters of corruption and the flies that feast on deathblight, Godwyn continues to serve as a bridge between different forms of existence. Those who approach his throne with hostility find only corruption and horror, but those who come seeking understanding may discover something more complex. A reminder that even the most terrible transformations can give birth to new possibilities. Conclusion: the prince who became death itself. And so we come to the end of our journey through the tragic tale of Godwyn the Golden, though his story itself knows no ending. In the depths beneath the Erd tree, where light never penetrates and time moves according to alien rhythms, the Prince of Death maintains his eternal vigil. His body has grown beyond all recognition. His mind has been scattered to the winds of eternity, but his influence continues to shape the world in ways both subtle and profound. From the Golden Prince who commanded dragons and inspired devotion, to the corrupted mass of flesh and scale that spreads deathblight through the roots of the world, Godwyn's transformation represents one of the most complete falls from grace in the entire mythology of the lands between. Yet, it also represents something more, a reminder that even the most terrible curses can become the foundation for new forms of understanding and existence. The undead who worship him as the Prince of Death see in his corruption not a source of horror, but a pathway to a different kind of life. The age of Duskborn that his existence makes possible would restore death to its proper place in the cosmic order, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a natural and necessary counterpart to life itself. Perhaps this is Godwyn's final lesson. That transformation, however painful and incomprehensible, remains always possible. The Golden Prince may be gone forever, but the Prince of Death offers something that the old order never could: the promise that endings are not always failures, that corruption can become the soil for new growth, and that even the deepest darkness can give birth to forms of light previously unimaginable. In the throne room, where purple waters lap against ancient stone, where flies buzz through air, thick with the essence of undeath, where a fish-tailed monstrosity rests in the shadow of tainted roots. Godwyn the Golden continues his transformed existence. He is no longer the prince who befriended dragons or commanded golden lightning, but he remains what he always was at heart, a bridge between different worlds, a figure who makes possible connections that should not exist, a reminder that the boundaries we imagine to be absolute are often far more fluid than we dare to believe. And perhaps, in the end, that is enough. Perhaps it is enough that Godwyn's sacrifice, willing or unwilling, opened pathways to new forms of existence, new relationships between life and death, new possibilities for those who had been excluded from the old order's vision of perfection. The Golden Prince may be dead, but the Prince of Death lives on, and in his corrupted existence, hope takes root in the most unlikely soil. The mist that shrouds the deepest places of the lands between carries with it the memory of what was lost and the promise of what might yet be found. In those depths, where ancient sorrows echo through crumbling stone and the weight of transformation presses down like winter fog, Godwyn the Golden continues his eternal watch, no longer a prince of light, but a lord of shadows who offers his own form of salvation to those brave enough to seek it in the darkness. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the tragic and complex lore of Godwyn the Golden. His story reminds us that in the world of Elden Ring, even the greatest heroes can become something entirely different, and that sometimes the most profound transformations come through the greatest sufferings. If you enjoyed this exploration of one of the Lands Between's most fascinating characters, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the rich lore of Elden Ring. The mysteries of the Lands Between are vast and interconnected, and there are always more stories waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of the Great Tree.